on high when humanity will be able to use fire. And one character in this whole story, Prometheus, said, hey, it's not up for the gods to decide when humanity will use fire. Humanity will use fire when it decides it's best to use fire. So Prometheus, went up and he snuck a spark and he went down and he said, yo, human beings, here it is. Fan it up, use it as you see fit. And we borrowing that myth because like Prometheus, we feel that humanity in our country, in our society, is being denied the right to communicate. And, the corporate powers that be are controlling fire, and they're deciding if and when communities are going to be able to make their own media and tell their own stories. And we said, like the Zapatistas, ya basta, enough. We're going to do it anyway. So the purpose of the Prometheus Radio Project is to share the spark, is to conduct workshops and have training sessions so people and communities can learn how to set up a radio station, how to acquire a transmitter, how to communicate with itself in a way that's going to benefit and empower the community there.
Did you listen when they were broadcasting up here?
Yeah.
What did you think of it?
Well, a lot of it was amateurish, but it was very refreshing. When I was visiting in San Francisco before I moved to this area in the 50s. And there was a little hole in the wall in San Francisco where the soundproof was reversed egg crates. And they were broadcasting to the neighborhood. And that was perfectly legal. And they could talk about local problems, about they need a stop sign on a certain street and the cops weren't patrolling a certain area. And they had their own listeners. So it can be done, and I think it should be done. And because there were so many people who were willing to do it, even outside the law, they finally are beginning to loosen up a little bit. But it takes eternal vigilance because everyone who tunes into that station isn't tuning into a top 40 station.
Do you think that LPFM, is that one of the worries too, that it may provide more competition for broadcasters who may well have, because of consolidation, might not be focusing as much locally, that an LPFM station might provide something of more interest to local communities than, say, something broadcast out of Toledo, Ohio, or something like that?
Our concern over LPFM is not related to competition, it's related to interference. We think there's no way to shoehorn hundreds, if not thousands, of new stations onto a congested, finite radio band without creating significant interference and less ability for listeners to actually hear their hometown radio stations.
The NAB are incredibly well endowed with money, but they're very unpopular in the public eye right now. The public knows that the purpose of the National Association of Broadcasters is not to create a democracy, but rather to capture the largest block of public attention, which it then sells like scrap metal to be used for advertising.
Get those comments in by August 2nd, and the points that I would encourage you to make to the FCC when filing, especially about this particular 99-25 notice of proposed rulemaking regarding the issue of low-power FM radio service. Specifically, we're asking for non-commercial access. So we don't want, if they do license people, we don't want stations to be able to run advertisements. We think that our station is a perfect example of how a community can come together to run a radio station. And we don't need the interests of the corporations that dominate the media to come in and buy out all our frequencies.
Do you think the FCC has done a decent job of managing the airwaves?
They are shutting down pirates, which is a good idea. Pirates are illegal, number one. They're causing disruptive transmissions between airline pilots and air traffic controllers. That's their main job, or one of their main jobs, is to be the spectrum police, if you will. And it's important. It's an important role that the FCC has, and I think they are pretty good at policing the spectrum. We understand Chairman Kennard's goals with this proposal, and they're laudable goals. More diversity is a good thing, and we support it.
The fact is that the NAB, they have to respect the authority of the FCC, even though they've been criticizing very harshly Chairman Bill Kennard. And in fact, they even had an editorial on their website saying, Bill Kennard, the man who killed radio in America. And they've been screaming bloody murder about this stuff, mostly charging interference.
What do you think about Bill Kennard?
I think Bill Kennard is a very brave man. I think he's showing a lot of dedication and perseverance. He's come under a lot of fire from the start. I mean, when he first came on board, he announced that he intended to create some sort of low-power broadcast service and let regular community people get on the radio. And he's caught a lot of criticism for this, but he has persevered. And in fact, he's brought a lot of people, including 3 of the other 4 commissioners, over to his side.
We see an FCC that's increasingly responsive to the pressure that we're exerting on the grassroots level. We've got lawsuits, we've got letter writing campaigns, we've got civil disobedience, we've got protests, we've got people all over this country engaging in micropower radio and putting the pressure on the FCC. We are getting positive exposure in the media, and we're seeing William Kennard responding in a very positive way. Not entirely positive, but shows the beginnings of a positive response. How? The FCC have issued a notice of proposed rulemaking suggesting that micropower radio in some form or another be legalized. When you actually look at the details of their proposal, you see that there's a lot of mistakes, and the FCC makes suggestions that are totally abhorrent, and no one would ever accept it except for commercial entities. But we see them taking steps toward the legalization of micropower radio.
The strategy of the FCC to divide and conquer, to get everybody hyped up about this possibility of low-power radio, has, in a sense, backfired as they continue to postpone making a decision, and it becomes clear that this is more and more of an illusion. Even the proposals that get floated seem to be inadequate and so on. People who are enticed, by the possibility of doing licensed radio where they wouldn't constantly be under threat, are now reevaluating.
It's going to shift the terrain quite a bit. I mean, people are not going to be helped much by what the FCC is proposing. I think when they realize that they're being essentially offered a bill of goods without much substance, it's going to perhaps even aggravate them even more, hopefully.
January 20th of this year, a lot of us were very excited to hear that the FCC had decided to approve some sort of plan for low-power FM broadcasting. And immediately cries of woo-hoo were heard coming from our studio down here on Dwight Way in Berkeley. And people were making announcements to the effect that, oh boy, now we can get a license. We're not pirate radio anymore. We can get a license. And these are folks who read the large print and did not read the small print. First of all, anybody who has illegally broadcasted since February 26th of 1999 will be automatically considered ineligible. Anybody who broadcasted after 24 hours of receiving a notice from the FCC will be considered ineligible.
What do you think about that?
I think it sucks.
One of the most myopic and blind parts of the FCC's proposal, their notice of proposed rulemaking, is that micro-broadcasters who have engaged in civil disobedience and who have been caught by the FCC with micropower equipment or operating would not be permitted to hold a license if and when LPFM is legalized. Well, we think that's an abhorrent insult to our democracy. FCC is saying that people who engaged in civil disobedience and did this while it was illegal won't be responsible license holders because they didn't obey the unjust law in the first place. That's like telling Rosa Parks, after sitting in the front of the bus, that she's not allowed to have the same rights as everybody else because she'll be an unreliable citizen, because she didn't follow the rules. Well, it's because of the micro broadcasters in the first place that this whole issue was forced into the mainstream media and forced onto the radar screen of the FCC.
Anybody who lives in an urban area like the San Francisco Bay Area or Los Angeles area or New York City area will be ineligible because the FCC is protecting the adjacent channels for the high-power broadcasters who are already on the air. These folks will not have to give up 1 watt of power. And so the problem is if you live in an urban area, there are not going to be very many licenses given away because of this adjacent channel protection.
Never, ever will I ever consider a license. I don't really care what the FCC is talking about. I mean, they can talk about anything they want, and they can, and they have, and they will. That's not our concern. Our concern is the liberation struggle, and if this is an effective means to assist us in the struggle for liberation, well, they have to do what they got to do because we're going to do what we got to do, period. They're not an issue. It's like when we came back on in '89, we have had to apparently made that decision. And there's no change in the program, none. The conditions that we were speaking against in '89 have only gotten worse. So if anything else, we're more resolved in our commitment.
Within the micropower radio movement, there is a strong anarchist contingent, people like Mabana and Stephen, who do not respect the FCC's claim to authority over the airwaves. They feel that the airwaves belong to the American people and should not be auctioned off to the highest bidder and multinational corporations the way they are now in this country. So I suspect even if we got everything on our wish list granted to us, there would still be people violating FCC regulations. For instance, my good friend Billy Jam called me up on the phone. He said, "Paul, now that the FCC has changed the rules, does this mean the end of pirate radio?" I told him, "Don't worry. There will always be pirate radio."
Pain, well, little girl, you don't have to explain. Saw the truth, but it's late. No